Super Earth, our home. Prosperity. Liberty. Hi there. Democracy.
Okay, right, I don't know how long I can keep the broadcast up, but I think they're coming for me. Okay, so, Super Earth is coming for you. They've been lying to you this entire time.
See exotic new life forms.
We will return to Cyberstan and rebuild what you destroyed.
The Automatons should have been content with what they had.
The war, the Terminids, the bots, all of it. Every last bit of fabrication.
And spread managed democracy throughout the galaxy.
I haven't got long, but whatever you do not fall for their lies. Do not listen to them, the democracy officers, all of it.
We will give you the grace and the peace that you have withheld from us.
I'm sorry, but good luck.
Become a hero. Become a legend. Become a Helldiver.
In case you've been living under a rock since February, Helldivers 2 is a new multiplayer hotness developed by Arrowhead Games. And I gotta say, I've been enjoying it a lot lately. It's been a good time dropping onto hostile planets to shoot up bugs, bots and occasionally your teammates in pursuit of a greater war effort. And that war effort is in the interest of Super Earth, the conglomeration of Earth's countries that have formed a world government and are setting out to get humanity's grubby mitts on every planet, resource and sentient being in the galaxy. Of course, there are many shooters throughout history centered on saving humanity from alien threats, but Helldivers 2 is in a lot of ways a cut above the rest, especially among games using the live servers model. For anyone who's not aware, Helldivers 2 sees you select from a variety of missions on one of the two fronts of the war. The Terminids, which are these funky bug creatures who attack in swarms and definitely aren't off-brand Tyranids, and the Automatons, who fight with vehicles and heavy infantry to turn your lovely evening gaming with friends into fucking Stalingrad. Mission objectives have tons of variety. Sometimes you have to extract oil from a deposit on the planet, launch a nuclear missile from a silo swarming with enemies, rescue scientists who really don't seem to want to be rescued,
even though the objective is right there. The gates of heaven.
or just kill as many of the fuckers as you can. You do the main objective, you do any side objectives on the planet you want to do, like destroying outposts or terminating illegal broadcasts, and then either extract or die in glory, ensuring the enemies of Super Earth choke on your corpses, at the low cost of all the samples you've collected. Other than the friendly fire, there's no PvP here. No way you can tell the Terminid brood commander that you banged its mum. Just some wholesome co-op fun, shooting enemies and saving the day. Except I want to ask you, whose day are you really saving? When you're taking part in that galactic war effort, who are you really fighting for? While each Helldiver operates with a decent amount of personal freedom of which fights they take and how and where they take them, they're all ultimately bankrolled by and report to Super Earth High Command, who manages the war effort and provides the opportunity for Helldivers to upgrade their ship, weapons and gear using their earnings from missions. Because what's a war without the opportunity to cut a little bit of a profit? But if you pay attention, you notice a few things that seem a little bit off. Things that you see that you can't completely explain. Like in the loading screen when your Hellpod is falling to the planet below, interspersed with your typical loading screen tips, you'll read about some malicious rumours of something called a freedom camp. What's a freedom camp? Is this statement about them true or a lie? If they really exist, do Helldivers get sent to them when they fail their objective? If not, why would someone get sent there? There are lots of things you can run into during your day-to-day saving the galaxy that make you ask questions like this. When you board the ship for the first time, why are you getting thawed out of some sort of stasis chamber? And who's in these pods behind you? Why do the Helldivers who reinforce you when you die look and sound exactly like your last playable character? What do the Automatons want? How do the Terminids, who have the technology level of the Cybertruck, travel between planets? And most importantly, who's leaving these really bizarre product reviews in the item shop? You might look for these answers on the bridge of your ship, by talking to the democracy officer or paying attention to the broadcast on your monitors. But you won't find them. The crew will just brush you off, thank you for your service as a Helldiver, and send you on your way. Of course, it's definitely interesting to consider the answers to these questions, but perhaps more important than these answers themselves is to ask, why don't we know these answers? Why is information being hidden from us? And here's something I really hope you've worked out by now if you've been paying attention to this game at all. Super Earth are not the good guys here.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them? Hands. Are we the baddies?
You're playing the soldiers in service of the bad guys of the setting. You are a stormtrooper, or a flying monkey, or that guy in Arkham City that says, "It's the freaking bat!" And the fact that you're so willing to do that, and in some people's cases not even realise it, is because both you and the Helldiver you're playing are spoon-fed a constant diet of the best nourishment for any willing army. Propaganda. And that, friends and foes, is what today's video is about. Super Earth, and the game of Helldivers 2 itself, has its wheels greased by a comprehensive and tongue-in-cheek but nevertheless effective propaganda machine. I want to talk today about how that propaganda works, what it's trying to tell you, and what it's trying to hide. Both through the in-universe propaganda that Super Earth is pushing out to its brave soldiers fighting for managed democracy, and the propaganda pushed out by Arrowhead themselves in their capacity as game developers, presented to you, at home, the player. From the moment you first load into Helldivers 2, you're immediately presented with Super Earth recruitment material, and the first thing you'll notice is that Super Earth looks like quite a lovely place to live. The heavily armed military police that patrol the street are friendly and polite. The colour palette is all white and light blue, and the houses and streets are organised like a typical white picket fence American suburb. That is, until the big scary Terminid arrives, and suddenly the horrors of galactic warfare are right there, literally on your doorstep. Even if you spend your time drinking lead paint for fun, the function of this video, broadcasted as a PSA by Super Earth's government, is obvious. It's an advertisement, trying to get you, the viewer, to sign up to become a Helldiver, because this idyllic image of suburban bliss could be shattered at any point, and you need to take up the fight to defend it. The images it presents are very traditionally American, with rows and rows of detached single-family homes serviced by cars and bathed in a clement afternoon sun. It's the exact kinds of images that real American propaganda outlets have used since the Second World War. The nuclear family in a white picket suburb, used to sell everything from war bonds to cars to Pepsi to fridges, and right now it's being used to sell, well, the military. But it's vital to remember that this is the only view of life back on Super Earth that we ever get, and for all we know it might not even be a true representation of what life is like for civilians there. The only perspective we have on what civilian life is like is presented to us by people with a vested interest in showing it as idyllic and utopian, and a lot of players simply don't get it. Either because they don't realise that this entire ad is manufactured by a group with an agenda, because they see images they recognise, or because they simply don't care. And that agenda could not be clearer. The Helldivers we see in this video are clearly meant to be shown as effortlessly heroic, the kind of people who can take on the worst the galaxy can throw at them and be home in time for tea, who treat warfare as a stroll in the park. And if you join up, you can be a hero just like them. Unstoppable foes that will ravage democracy if you don't save the day will wither away and die under the weight of your massive balls. This is a contradiction that's actually very typical of propaganda narratives that offer up an enemy to fight, like the woke mob that you'll hear from talking heads on right-wing news media and blue-check Twitter accounts. Depending on the context, the woke mob is simultaneously an existential threat to infiltrate society at every level and require a decisive and immediate response to stop them taking over the world, and also a bunch of teenage work-shy soy boys who don't know how the real world works and wouldn't last 5 minutes in a proper debate. The enemy of the propagandist, the scapegoat, has to be both pathetic enough to be easily defeatable with no real risk to yourself, but dangerous enough to make defeating them mandatory. And the Helldivers propaganda piece is no different. Because in the domestic context, the Terminids are an existential threat. But in combat with our brave Helldivers, has anyone else noticed the bugs are just standing there, not fighting back at all? All the bugs are ever shown doing is either running mindlessly into the Helldivers to get gunned down in 1s or 2s, lying dead, or just standing still and letting themselves get shot to bits, so that our noble soldiers can get their time in the spotlight. This is all done to show that the Helldivers are effectively supermen, who chew through humanity's enemies for breakfast, and if you join up, you can be this Superman too. The military isn't boring or dangerous, it's just palling around with the boys, and shooting up useless little bugs and looking badass with guns and stuff. So there's really no threat in joining up. right? Having played the game and fought through many of the sticky situations and most terrifying war zones the galaxy can throw at us, we all know that isn't quite true. But that's not the point here. Super Earth shows its material to its citizens as a recruitment tool, and despite how absurd it is if you're paying attention to it, it's hard to deny it works. After all, historically this has worked on real people before. We have examples of identical propaganda that uses these images and these ideas that have resulted in massive cultural shifts after the Second World War. And it's clearly working again because, well, this is the game's opening cinematic. If you're watching this scene, you're probably playing the game. You've joined the Helldivers. You've done exactly what Super Earth wanted you to do all along. And once you're in game, it really doesn't get better. And to see why, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the subject of Super Earth propaganda out here on the front lines. The Helldivers themselves. When you load into the game for the first time, your Helldiver is defrosted from their cryo chamber and let out into your ship. When you look around, you might notice some amenities that your ship lacks. There's no bed, no area for rest and recreation. The arcade machine is broken, there isn't even a chair. And once you come back from a mission, there's no actual respite before the next one. You can go to the ship module or the armory to customize your gear, but beyond that you're hopping into your hellpod to go right back into the fighting. Assuming you don't die on mission, which is a huge assumption, your life is pretty much constant fighting. Dropped into warzone after warzone with no real breaks in the battle, and if you're ever found without anything to do, then you're shoved into cryo storage and literally put on ice until you're needed again. Wake up, fight, go to sleep, repeat. That's your life on this front line, and it won't stop until the war is won. This serves two functions. It both keeps the resources spent on maintaining Helldivers outside of active combat to a minimum, and it helps to maintain a sense of urgency among the troops. If you're spending time training, resting up, or even just waiting for the next mission, that's time you can spend thinking. Asking what's going on, examining the situation for yourself a little closer, simply because you're not currently fighting for your life on some desolate alien world. It's hard to have the wherewithal to wonder why you're here, who you're fighting, and why you're fighting them when you're getting run down by a Terminid charger or bathed in laser fire by automatons. Your task is to get the job done and get out, and when your life is on the line, that's all you're going to do. You know this feeling yourself from playing the game. You might be able to enjoy the planet's scenery, dick around with your friends, or even go achievement hunting on lower difficulties, but when things get tough, you've got to lock in if you want to make it out alive. This hectic, constant battle for survival that the Helldivers are thrown into means that Super Earth doesn't have to worry too much about one of the major logistical problems that many armed forces run into. What to do with soldiers when they're not actively soldiering, and how to keep them motivated to continue soldiering. But to keep them motivated to finish the mission and not, shoot each other and run away, Super Earth employs a carrot and stick approach to morale. If you run out of the mission parameters for too long, you'll get blasted off the face of the Earth with instant destroyer fire that deploys faster and more precisely than the actual artillery barrages that you can call in. So that's a pretty compelling stick to get you moving in the right direction. But you're not explicitly threatened into compliance unless you actively try and push your luck. The carrot, however, is much more enticing and interesting, because even though the Helldivers aren't participating in civilian life, the illusion of closeness to one's family and loved ones back home is preserved through propaganda on the ship itself. Even while it's spending their lives with no more reluctance than firing a bullet from a gun, Super Earth takes pains to provide Helldivers with the illusion that whatever they're doing out here on the front lines is having a tangible impact on civilian life back home, to make them feel like they're a member of the community that they left behind, even though they'll likely never see them again. Whenever you load into your ship, you might do so to a Stromer news broadcast directly fed into your ship, and it's heavily implied that this is the same broadcast that civilians back home get. It's a discolored report of the war effort and the Helldivers' struggle to put things right, and it functions to tie the Helldivers back to civilian life in a way they'd be able to recognise from their civilian life before signing on. News broadcasts on the war effort are likely as omnipresent as news broadcasts are today, likely more in a dedicated propaganda state like Super Earth. So getting these continuous broadcasts in lieu of detailed military briefings would ensure they still get a sense of home on the front lines of galactic war. The fact that this is how news is received outside traditional military briefings and orders also has a secondary purpose, one that's portrayed by this little sign right here. If it's all approved by the Ministry of Truth, why does it bear the name Stromer News? The Helldivers are loyal to Super Earth after all. Why not just make it Super Earth News? Why does it have to resemble and wear the clothes of corporate news media when the authoritarian state signs off on every broadcast. It's not just the news either, there's tons of ads too for things like perfume and toy helmets for the kids. Not exactly normal military briefing fare. Well, this is where we start to get into the politics and ideologies of Super Earth. Because up until now we've been operating under the assumption that the galactic war Super Earth is fighting is broadly necessary, and that Super Earth's government is a totalitarian response to a war effort that's nevertheless an actual existential threat to humanity. This is very much not the case. And as we're about to go into, the galactic war is a strictly material endeavour instigated by Super Earth, and a lot of the propaganda in place is the way it is to conceal that fact from Helldivers dying on the war's front lines. The most common enemies featured in propaganda pieces for Super Earth are the Terminids, alien insects who live in huge hives and gestate in holes in the ground. The Terminids have infested huge numbers of worlds and presented an existential threat to Super Earth. According to Super Earth, who quite coincidentally value Terminid corpses incredibly highly as sources of E710, an exceptionally efficient and valuable fuel source. Every Terminid massacre committed by the Helldivers then leaves vast amounts of bug corpses for Super Earth to extract, process and use to fuel the Empire. This isn't a desperate fight for survival or even for ideology, like the propaganda pieces convey. This is an oil war, plain and simple. Maybe in the first game there was an argument to be made that the bugs were a genuine existential threat to humanity, but by the second game Super Earth has started farming them, and is currently experimenting on them with growth hormones to keep up the E710 production. If this truly was a battle for survival, why is Super Earth so keen on keeping them alive and allowing them to reproduce? And the best bit is that the bugs producing E710 isn't even a secret. It appears to be fairly common knowledge, so Super Earth aren't even trying to hide the ulterior motive for the war very well. But their constant propaganda covers their ass over and over again. We know E710 is why they want to fight, but Super Earth propaganda is so consistent at showing the bugs to be an existential threat that people, and especially the Helldivers, don't seem to want to make that connection because the narrative of a bestial and savage enemy that must be fought is easier to rationalise. This unfortunately is not a unique issue to fiction. The Terminid front being effectively a giant oil war perpetuated by Super Earth is a fairly obvious allegory for the constant wars in the Middle East that the US either directly involves themselves in or uses proxies that they fund and arm to maintain power in the region and continue to have access to its oil. The fact that Super Earth keeps breeding Terminids in farms and is actively cultivating a hostile population to continue the war effort and therefore oil access is probably the most damning piece of satire here, because actively cultivating conflict in the Middle East has been how America has historically exerted power in the region to get that oil. Just look at how the Americans armed and recruited for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the Cold War, only for those same Mujahideen to become the Taliban that the US got involved again to get rid of. Or even today, how the US government's continued funding of Israel despite the IDF's record of human rights atrocities, just so they can get a slice of the wealth and power that Israel is due to cultivate from occupied Gaza. Just like the Terminids, they are a dehumanized enemy of the imperialists' own creation, and for every genuine existential threat that must be stamped out, the constant war is far too profitable to simply let it go and stop the killing. And this means the propaganda state Super Earth has built around their oil war is legitimizing all the losses of life. The civilians dead in Terminid breaches, the Helldivers who die retaking the planets they seize, and the masses of dead bugs themselves, all to keep fuel prices low. Some things never change. The Automatons are the other major front Super Earth is fighting on, and you'll notice they don't appear in propaganda pieces as often as the bugs do. You might think that's odd. Powerful weapons, skull faces, tanks and chainsaws and rocket launchers, they make a pretty scary enemy that could easily show the threat the Helldivers have to take down. But therein lies the problem. The bugs can easily be sold as mindless chaff for the Helldivers to blast through, but it's way harder to look glorious, invincible, or even justified when you're fighting the bots. First of all, the menacing mechanized nature of the bots means that unlike the war on the bugs, which is more or less just shooting huge numbers of very pissed off farm animals, the bots are intelligent, organised and extensively armed and armoured. It's far harder to motivate soldiers to shoot the enemies of democracy in the face when those enemies are actually likely to shoot you back, often with more or bigger guns than you could ever bring to bear. But perhaps more importantly, engaging too much with the realities of automaton warfare for the purposes of propaganda might backfire. because unlike the bugs whose motivations can mostly be expressed in the word lunchtime, the bots have an established motive for warfare that not only makes the resistant Super-Earth more forgivable, but might even prove reason for Helldivers or citizens of Super-Earth to defect to their cause. The Automatons aren't really fighting a territory war. They're the creations of the cyborgs. Enemies from the first Helldivers game, who Super-Earth defeated and imprisoned in the mines of Cyberstan. And the war on Super-Earth is a liberation mission designed to free their creators. It's very telling that, unlike the bugs, where the knowledge of E710 is at worst an open secret, any relationship between the Automatons and the cyborgs of Cyberstan was vehemently denied by Super-Earth, despite how obvious it was to anybody who's played both games. The aesthetics and weaponry are the same, and many units like the Hulks are shared by both factions. If the civilians or troops become aware of why the Automatons were fighting, something that they're not subtle about at all, there might be a level of sympathy to their cause, and Super-Earth won't tolerate that.
Everyone knows Cyberstan has been a rehabilitation facility for the cyborgs since the first Galactic War. What a lot of people don't realize is just how many patriotic citizens it takes to keep an operation like that afloat. We will avenge every last one of them.
In a society as oppressive and authoritarian as Super-Earth's, the promise of equality and collectivization that the bots offer might be a genuinely compelling alternative way of life for potential defectors, and the cyborgs of the first game were very well aware of this, since they actively tried to recruit the Helldivers assigned to destroy them. Granted, there's no way to know how sincere the bots are being with their promises of an equal and fair society. For all we know, they're running a propaganda state too. But regardless, the fact that Super-Earth is so consistent in underinforming the civilians and soldiers highlights how an entirely preventable war that Super-Earth themselves started, and that they have vested interest in maintaining, is sustained largely on propaganda. So the two factions Super-Earth's propagandizing against are effectively feral farm animals who provide an endless source of cheap fuel, and a rival state who at least promise a better life than Super-Earth, and are only fighting them in the first place because Super-Earth imprisoned and enslaved its leaders. In other words, both fights Super-Earth started, and have a vested interest in maintaining. If peace on the Terminid front was that important, they could simply stop cultivating them and wipe them out completely. But then they'd lose their oil reserves, and they don't want that. And if they really wanted peace on the Automaton front, they could try to negotiate and release the cyborg prisoners to create two coexisting galactic superstates. But doing so would concede those prisoners, concede territory, and possibly even concede defectors to the other cause, and they don't want that either. Super-Earth benefits immensely from the constant state of war on two fronts, regardless of the lives lost in the conflict. And the only reason the people of Super-Earth will tolerate it is because the bottomless frozen yogurt machine of propaganda has been force-feeding them misinformation and lies since the day they were born. The wars are not ideological or existential, they are material, battles for territory and resources, and Super-Earth is willing to pay a steep price in lives to maintain those wars. And if they're hiding the truths of their foes they're fighting from the population, imagine the other truths they're hiding. Speaking of which, before we wrap up on Super-Earth, I want to talk about one of these truths. Truth being a word which here means a thing I think is true but we have no concrete proof of, so take it with a grain of salt. You know when you first load into your ship and you thaw out of that chamber? Have you ever looked back and realised that people in the chamber look exactly like you do? Worryingly, exactly like you. And this lends credence to the theory that I've had for a while. When you respawn in Helldivers 2, you don't just respawn, but a reinforcement is sent down from your super destroyer for you to play as, and it looks and sounds exactly like the Helldiver you were playing before. Same voice, the same body, the same weapons and armour, everything. Normally I'd write this off as just a quirky, didactic take on respawning, something with dubious relevance in the actual Helldivers canon, but these same figures are on the ship frozen in cryostasis, so I guess that means that each and every respawn being a totally different person, despite looking exactly the same, is canon. With that in mind, I believe the Helldivers who play as in the game are clones, all taking the original Helldiver just when they passed basic training, or perhaps even cloned before basic training. It would make sense, what with how quickly they burn through troops, to keep the fresh flow of recruits despite the horrific attrition rate, and it would explain why the whole platoon of Helldivers isn't deployed at once, but are instead drip-fed in to maintain a team of 4 at all times. If you deployed 5 of the same person in one location, it'd be fairly obvious that they were clones, but if they're only replaced when they die, it's far harder for anyone to realise why the reinforcements are so heavily staggered. I mean, wouldn't it be one last great irony for a galactic empire that markets itself to citizens on freedom, liberty, and the individual dream of glory to rob its soldiers so badly of their individuality that not even their name and their body belongs to them anymore? But whether or not this is actually true, it couldn't be more clear that when it comes to truthfully presenting the state of and reasons behind the Galactic War, Super Earth is very much on a need-to-know basis, and the way they see it, it's better off when nobody needs to know. The entire Galactic War effort on both fronts is held together entirely by Super Earth's all-encompassing propaganda machine that mass-produces soldiers to live and die for the material gains of the guys at the top. With one hand, they claim the wars against bug and bot alike are matters of life and death, and that the only way to save democracy is to join up to fight those wars, while with the other hand they perpetuate these wars for material gain and misrepresent the enemies they fight to manipulate population into signing up for this constant war. And what really impresses me is that despite how incredibly on the nose all this is, how obvious it is when you look at it, a surprising number of players don't seem to get it at all. I've mentioned several times in this video that Super Earth propaganda with regards to foreign policy and military action has a lot in common with the United States in the years following World War II, dating from the Cold War to the War on Terror, and leading up still to the present day. And I think a lot of misunderstandings about what Helldivers is trying to say can be found here. It's easy to attribute simply to poor media literacy, but I think there's more to it than just that. Those of us here in the West, especially in America, have grown up with foreign oil wars and regime changes as a fact of life, a constant background noise perpetuated by our governments and justified by their propaganda engines. When you spent our entire lives being propagandized to the point that these events have become normal, it shouldn't be surprising that we fall for it when the same propaganda is shown to us in a fictional context. And this is where this video is going to go a little off the rails, because we've been talking so far about how Super Earth's propagandizing its citizens and soldiers, but it's time we look a little bit bigger at the Helldivers devs themselves and the propaganda they're showing to you. And if this video has got you in the mood to fight for managed democracy, then you can check out this channel's partner, Instant Gaming, to get a great deal on all your games. Instant Gaming is a brilliant online marketplace offering discounts on all your favourite titles and DLCs, so you can pick up Helldivers 2 and save yourself a chunk of change in the process. There's plenty of other games too, like this weird little horror game I've heard so much about. Not sure if it's fun or not, but apparently the YouTubers who cover it are pretty cool. Check out Instant Gaming using my link in the description to start saving. And now, back to Helldivers. Let's be clear here. I'm not saying that Arrowhead shares the corporatist tyrannical ideology of Super Earth, and I'll be going into that later, but it's important not to forget that Super Earth isn't a real thing that exists outside of its creator. Every decision made in the presentation of Super Earth and how they spread their propaganda is a deliberate creative choice by Arrowhead, and many of the choices Arrowhead made in developing the game ended up making Super Earth's narrative easier for players to buy into. Even something as simple and fundamental as the game's exclusive PvE nature helps the game's propaganda land more easily. Many popular live service shooters today fall under the hero shooter subgenre, meaning they typically feature a wide and colourful cast of characters from all different walks of life, backgrounds and alignments, so that no matter what you're looking for, you're able to find it. And this has a side effect of often showing multiple characters or events in different lights, depending on whose story you're reading. For example, Winston takes on a very different light in Tracer's story compared to his role in Wrecking Ball's story. To Tracer, he's a considerate and determined friend, who saved her life by building her the chronal accelerator she needed to maintain stability in her own time stream. And he's become one of her closest friends, in the years following Overwatch's reuniting under his leadership. However, in Wrecking Ball's story, Winston comes across as more callous or inconsiderate, since he stole Wrecking Ball's rocket designs for his escape ship when he left the Horizon Lunar Colony, and even left Hammond for dead when he abandoned the station. He didn't seem to think about the little rodent at all, something Hammond is not happy about when they run into each other again on Earth.
Hammond, we were friends on Horizon. Where did we go wrong?
Perhaps it was when you stole his rocket design.
Oh no, I found that in the system. It was an accident.
Was it also an accident when you left for Earth without him?
We get to see Winston's life from multiple perspectives, and this fleshes him out, and tons of other games do this too. I'm a really big fan of how the Blighton twins stories change the perspectives of viewing Felix and Elodie's stories in Dead by Daylight, for example. But by nailing the players to one perspective and more or less eliminating the idea of characters completely, Helldivers is pretty much the exact opposite. We're not shown any events that would genuinely change our perspective on Super-Earth away from what they'd want us to believe. There's no scene where we're shown a grieving Terminid widow, waiting for her husband to come back from Hellmire, only for him to never return because the evil Helldivers killed him. We're left to interpret Super-Earth's actions without any perspective outside of Super-Earth's own, and that allows its narratives to go relatively unchallenged. This even persists outside of the game itself. When the Helldivers developers communicate with players, you'll notice they don't talk like traditional game devs, and often prefer to stay in character as effectively Super-Earth's high command, issuing briefings and instructions to Helldivers underneath them. Look on their Twitter page, for example, and you'll see propaganda posters showing our brave Helldivers or memorialising historic victories like Malevelon Creek, and even the community art showcases are given that typical Super-Earth patriotic zeal. This is a great means of delivering Super-Earth propaganda directly to waiting players, especially in a world where the relationship between devs and players has never been closer. We live in a world of dev updates and feedback polls, experimental betas, where devs and players are expected to constantly interact with each other, and Arrowhead uses that closeness to speak with the voice of their Super-Earth propagandists. It's absolute genius, and allows players to join in with the irony, play along, and create a genuinely loyal army of players by reveling in the satirical absurdity of their own propaganda. And that's the important part of how Arrowhead propagandizes the players of Helldivers 2. Yes, the propaganda is everywhere, but far more importantly, it's utterly and completely absurd, and it never really pretends to be anything else. Like, it'd be one thing if Arrowhead seemed to genuinely believe in Super-Earth's ideology, but the whole reason they go so ham on the propaganda is to show how absurd it is. How hard Super-Earth has to work to twist their narrative to get citizens on board, and how blatantly unsubtle they are about the truth of their operations. By adhering so closely to Super-Earth's absurd propaganda narrative, Arrowhead has created a community where everyone can laugh at Super-Earth, get in on the joke and enjoy the game for what it is. A charming satire where you can lead a suicidal charge for the biggest joke of an empire in the galaxy and have a great time doing it. Is what I would say if I was a filthy traitor. Remember, citizens of Super-Earth, if you see anyone spreading treasonous lies like the examples in this video, report them to your local democracy officer immediately, because every word from a traitor's mouth is a knife in the back of Lady Liberty, and only with your help can we ensure the continued sanctity of managed democracy.